The shadowy halls of the Galactic Embassy hummed with an electric tension. Thomas Wren stood at attention, his broad shoulders squared against the unyielding weight of his new assignment. A former soldier with a reputation for unflinching loyalty, he'd seen his fair share of odd jobs, but nothing like this. Today, he was tasked with protecting Arae, the alien envoy from the enigmatic Lasari species. The Lasari were unlike any species humanity had encountered in its century of interstellar expansion. Elegant, crystalline beings with a shimmer to their skin that seemed to refract light itself. They spoke in musical tones and harbored an air of mystery. Despite their beauty, the Lasari were fragile, physically incapable of surviving prolonged exposure to deceit, a fact that made their role in galactic politics precarious. For Thomas, it was a straightforward mission: protect Arae during negotiations with the Andral Consortium, a notoriously cunning species known for their ruthless power plays. Still, he couldn't shake the unease gnawing at him. The stakes were higher than ever. One wrong move could plunge humanity and its newfound allies into a catastrophic war. When Arae finally entered the room, she moved like flowing water, her translucent form catching the embassy's dim lighting. Her voice was a melody, yet her words carried a weight that pulled Thomas's attention into sharp focus. "You are Thomas Wren," she said, her voice resonating faintly in his mind. "Your reputation precedes you." He inclined his head. "I'll do my job, ma'am. You won't come to harm under my watch." Her eyes, faceted like jewels, shimmered with a flicker of gratitude. "I hope your confidence proves true. The Andral are skilled in the art of falsehood, and I sense treachery brewing." Thomas shadowed Arae as she moved through the sterile corridors of the embassy, his hand never far from the plasma pistol holstered at his side. He could feel the eyes of Andral delegates following them, their expressions unreadable behind sleek, obsidian masks. The Andral were humanoid, but their culture thrived on manipulation and subtlety, a stark contrast to the open sincerity of the Lasari. Arae was reserved but sharp, always scanning her surroundings with a delicate intensity. Thomas had expected a delicate flower, but Arae's sharp questions during the first negotiation session showed a quick mind and a shrewd grasp of political nuance. She wasn't as fragile as she looked. Still, he noticed her falter after one particularly heated exchange. The Andral chief negotiator, Moore of Kale, had unleashed a stream of convoluted arguments designed to overwhelm and confuse. Arae's crystalline glow dimmed faintly, and Thomas stepped closer, his presence a silent shield. As the talks adjourned, Arae turned to him, her voice a thread of tension. "Kale's lies are corrosive. They sap my strength." Thomas frowned. He'd been briefed about this Lasari weakness, but seeing it firsthand was unsettling. "Is there anything I can do?" "You can stay close," she said quietly. "Your thoughts are clearer than most. They bolster me." He nodded, filing away the strange compliment. He wasn't a politician, but he could recognize when someone was up against a force greater than themselves. Arae was fighting an uphill battle, and something in her courage struck a chord in him. The first attempt on Arae's life came that evening. Thomas had stationed himself outside her quarters, his back against the cold metal wall, when a faint hiss caught his ear. In one fluid motion, he drew his weapon and scanned the hallway. The sound had come from the ventilation shaft above. A sleek, insectoid drone darted out, its limbs bristling with razor-sharp blades. Thomas fired without hesitation, the plasma bolt searing through the drone's carapace. It crashed to the ground in a heap of smoldering metal, but not before emitting a high-pitched wail that set his nerves on edge. Arae appeared in the doorway, her glow pulsing with alarm. "What happened?" "An assassination attempt?" he said grimly, crouching to examine the remains of the drone. "Andral tech, if I had to guess." Arae's gaze softened. "You saved me." "Thank you." Thomas stood, his jaw tightening. "It's my job, but this means someone's escalating the stakes. We need to be ready for more." She hesitated, then nodded. "You're right. If they succeed in undermining these talks, the consequences will ripple across the galaxy." Thomas met her gaze, a steely determination in his eyes. "Not on my watch." Over the next few days, the negotiations grew more fraught, and so did the danger. Thomas's presence became a lifeline for Arae, who grew visibly weaker with each round of verbal sparring. The Andral delegates seemed to sense her vulnerability, pressing harder with half-truths and veiled threats. Between sessions, Thomas began to notice cracks in Arae's crystalline facade, literal cracks, tiny fractures that glimmered faintly under the light. She dismissed his concern, insisting that the stress of the negotiations was manageable, but Thomas wasn't convinced. One night, as they shared a rare moment of quiet in her quarters, she surprised him with a question. "Do you believe in trust, Thomas Wren?" He blinked, caught off guard. "I suppose I do. It's not always easy to come by, but I've seen it hold people together when nothing else could." Arae tilted her head, studying him. "The Lasari have no choice but to trust. Our physiology demands it. But for you, it is a choice." "I find that fascinating." Thomas gave a wry smile. "Trust can get you killed, but sometimes it's the only way to survive." Arae's glow brightened faintly. "Perhaps that is why I feel safe with you." The words hung between them, charged with an unspoken connection. Thomas felt an unfamiliar warmth stir in his chest, a dangerous feeling in the midst of a mission. But he pushed it aside, focusing instead on the threat looming over them. Thomas's instincts told him the Andral weren't working alone. Someone inside the embassy was feeding them information. The realization came to a head when he intercepted a coded message on a secure channel, a message originating from the human delegation. Confronting his own people was a risky move, but Thomas didn't hesitate. He cornered the suspected operative in a dimly lit storage bay, his plasma pistol drawn. The traitor was a wiry technician with shifty eyes and a nervous twitch. "Who are you working for?" Thomas demanded, his voice cold as steel. The technician stammered, sweat beading on his forehead. "I don't know what you're talking about." Thomas stepped closer, the barrel of his weapon mere inches from the man's chest. "Try again." The technician broke, spilling everything. He'd been paid by an unknown benefactor to plant surveillance devices and relay information to the Andral. The revelation only deepened Thomas's unease. Whoever was pulling the strings was playing a far larger game than anyone realized. Returning to Arae, he laid out what he'd learned. Her reaction was as he expected, calm, but with a flicker of fear beneath the surface. "We're running out of time," she said softly. "If we cannot expose this plot, the negotiations will collapse." Thomas nodded, his jaw tightening. "Then we'll expose it. Together." Thomas and Arae worked tirelessly to uncover the conspiracy threatening the fragile negotiations. With tensions rising and time running out, the pair grew closer, their bond forged in the fires of danger and trust. Each new revelation deepened the layers of intrigue, painting a picture of a far-reaching scheme with multiple players. Arae's condition continued to deteriorate under the strain of the Andral's deceptions. Her crystalline form now carried visible fissures, shimmering faintly like glass under pressure. Despite her vulnerability, she refused to step back from her duties. One night, as Thomas stood guard outside her quarters, Arae beckoned him inside. Her usually bright glow had dimmed, her voice quieter than usual. "Thomas," she began, her faceted eyes locking onto his, "there's something I must tell you." He stepped closer, a ripple of unease coursing through him. "What is it?" She hesitated, then placed a hand, delicate and warm, on his arm. "The Lasari were not always as fragile as we are now. Long ago, we were stronger, more resilient. But our ancestors chose a path of absolute trust, severing their connection to deceit. Over generations, it changed us, binding us to honesty but leaving us defenseless against lies." Thomas frowned, the weight of her words sinking in. "And now, you're vulnerable to anyone willing to exploit that weakness." She nodded. "Yes, and that is why the Andral's duplicity is so devastating. Their words do more than confuse. They erode my very essence. If this continues, I may not survive." Her admission hit Thomas like a blow. He'd known her situation was dire, but hearing her say it out loud made the stakes all too real. "That's not going to happen," he said firmly. "We'll end this, Arae. We'll expose whoever's behind this plot, and we'll make sure these talks succeed." Arae's gaze softened, her glow brightening faintly. "I believe you." Thomas Wren. And for a Lasari, belief is a rare and precious thing. The next morning, Thomas's fears were confirmed. A series of encrypted transmissions intercepted by his team revealed that the Andril had smuggled a biological weapon into the embassy, one designed to target the Lasari's crystalline biology. Arae's life was now in immediate danger. Thomas knew they couldn't wait for the bureaucracy to catch up. The Andril negotiators were scheduled to meet Arae and the human delegation in the embassy's central chamber in just a few hours. If the weapon was deployed, it would be too late to stop the fallout. Arae, however, refused to back down. "I cannot abandon the negotiations," she insisted, her voice steady despite her weakened state. "If I do, the Andril will claim victory by default." Thomas clenched his fists, frustration boiling under the surface. "You can't negotiate if you're dead, Arae." Her eyes met his, unwavering. "And I cannot live knowing I failed my people. We Lasari value trust above all, Thomas. I must trust you to protect me." Her words left no room for argument. Thomas nodded grimly, his resolve hardening. "If we're doing this, then we do it my way. No risks." Arae inclined her head, a faint smile gracing her lips. "As you wish, Protector." As the negotiations began, Thomas stationed himself near Arae, his eyes scanning every face and every movement in the room. The Andril negotiators exuded an air of smug confidence. Their leader, More of Kale, leaning back in his chair with an almost predatory ease. The discussion quickly escalated into a verbal sparring match, with Kale weaving a web of half-truths and manipulations designed to wear Arae down. Thomas could see the strain in her posture, the subtle dimming of her glow with each carefully worded lie. Then he spotted it, a small, inconspicuous device being carried by one of the Andril aides. It was no larger than a handheld scanner, but the readings from Thomas's HUD indicated a dangerous energy signature. The biological weapon. Without hesitation, Thomas activated his comms, alerting his team. But before they could respond, the Andril aide made his move, surreptitiously placing the device beneath the table where Arae sat. Thomas didn't wait. Drawing his weapon, he stepped forward, his voice booming across the chamber. "Everyone, stand down." Gasps rippled through the room as he aimed his plasma pistol at the Andril aide. Security personnel rushed in, weapons raised, but Thomas held his ground. "That device is a weapon," he said coldly, his gaze fixed on the Andril aide. "Deactivate it now." Kale rose from his seat, his expression a mask of indignant outrage. "This is an outrage. Your accusations are baseless." Thomas ignored him, his focus unyielding. "Deactivate it, or I will." The aide hesitated, then reached for the device. But before he could comply, Kale barked an order in the Andril language. The aide froze, his hand retracting. Thomas didn't hesitate. A single plasma shot disabled the device, sending it skittering across the floor in a shower of sparks. Chaos erupted in the chamber. Andril delegates shouted in protest, accusing Thomas of sabotage, while human security forces scrambled to maintain control. Arae remained seated, her glow dim but steady, her expression unreadable. Then she stood. Her voice rang out like a clear bell, cutting through the cacophony. "Enough." The room fell silent as all eyes turned to her. Arae stepped forward, her presence commanding despite her fragile state. "The Andril have violated the sanctity of these negotiations," she said, her tone resolute. "This act of treachery will not go unanswered." Kale's smug demeanor faltered. "You have no proof?" "We have all the proof we need," Thomas interjected, holding up a recording device. He'd been capturing everything since the moment he spotted the weapon. Kale's face darkened, but he said nothing. The room buzzed with tension as Arae turned to Thomas, her gaze steady. "You have done your duty well, Thomas Wren," she said softly. "But this is not over. The Andril will not relent so easily." He nodded, his jaw tightening. "Then neither will we." The evidence Thomas provided was overwhelming. Within hours, the Galactic Embassy's Security Council convened an emergency session to address the Andril's transgressions. Arae and Thomas attended as key witnesses, their presence casting an almost sacred weight over the proceedings. The chamber was vast, its high ceilings and intricate architecture a testament to the cooperation of the galaxy's many species. Delegates from dozens of worlds watched with bated breath as Thomas presented the intercepted transmissions, the deactivated biological weapon, and the recording of Kale's attempt to suppress the aide's actions. Kale sat at the defense podium, his confidence eroding like sand under a relentless tide. When it was his turn to speak, he clung to desperation, accusing humanity of fabricating the evidence and attempting to sabotage the negotiations. His words rang hollow against the damning truth. Arae took the floor last, her crystalline form dimmed but resolute. She moved with measured grace, her voice a melody of unshaken conviction. The Lasari entered these negotiations with a spirit of trust and cooperation, she began. But the Andral have exploited that trust, not just against us, but against the principles that unite this council. This violation is not merely an affront to my people. It is a threat to the stability of this galaxy. The room fell silent as her words hung in the air. For a moment, it seemed the council itself held its breath, weighing the fate of the Andral against the fragile peace of interstellar politics. Finally, the presiding delegate, a towering figure from the amphibious Grelzer species, spoke. The evidence is clear. The Andral have acted in bad faith, and their actions are in direct violation of the Galactic Accords. Their delegation is hereby expelled from these proceedings, and further sanctions will be considered. The chamber erupted in a mix of applause and murmurs of dissent. The Andral delegation stormed out, their departure a quiet admission of defeat. Thomas caught a flicker of something on Kale's face as he exited. Not fear, but fury. Back in her quarters, Arae collapsed onto a low divan, her glow barely visible. Thomas hovered nearby, his concern etched into every line of his face. "You should rest," he said, his voice softer than usual. "You've been through hell." Arae offered a faint smile. "I will recover thanks to you. Without your strength, this day might have ended in disaster." He shook his head, his hand absently brushing the grip of his plasma pistol. "I just did my job. You're the one who stood up to them." She regarded him for a long moment, her eyes shimmering like liquid crystal. "You do not see your own value, Thomas Wren. You are more than a protector. You are a bridge between our worlds." The words settled deep in his chest, stirring emotions he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. He didn't respond, unsure of what to say, and instead busied himself inspecting the security feeds on his wrist console. But Arae wasn't finished. The Andral are far from defeated. Their plot runs deeper than this single incident. I fear they will not stop until they have what they desire. "And what's that?" Thomas asked, his eyes narrowing. Arae hesitated, her glow flickering faintly. "The Lasari carry knowledge, ancient, powerful knowledge. It is buried within our genetic memory, locked away by our ancestors. The Andral believe it could grant them dominion over the stars." Thomas stared at her, stunned. "You're saying they're after something encoded in your DNA?" She nodded. "Yes, and now that they have failed to break me through deceit, I fear they will resort to more violent means." Thomas's instincts proved correct. Less than 24 hours after the Andral's expulsion, Arae's quarters were infiltrated by an advanced cloaking drone, unlike anything the embassy's security systems had detected before. Thomas destroyed it in time, but its presence was a stark reminder that the Andral weren't done. The embassy's internal scans revealed a chilling discovery. A stealth ship had entered the planet's orbit. The vessel bore no official markings, but its energy signature matched Andral technology. It was waiting, silently watching. Thomas immediately sounded the alarm, but bureaucracy proved slower than action. The Lasari delegation was ordered to evacuate to a secured station on a nearby moon, but the transfer required time. Time the Andral would surely exploit. As Arae prepared for departure, Thomas worked alongside human and Lasari engineers to fortify the shuttle that would carry her. Every shield, every countermeasure, was double-checked under his watchful eye. He wasn't taking chances. Arae joined him in the hangar as he inspected the final preparations. Her glow had returned, faint but steady, and her presence seemed to calm the tension in the air. "You're unusually quiet," she observed. "Just focused," Thomas replied without looking up. "We've got one shot to get you out of here safely." I'm not screwing it up. Arae placed a hand on his arm, and he finally met her gaze. I trust you, she said simply. Her words, spoken with such sincerity, sent a jolt through him. For the first time, he realized how much her trust meant to him, and how deeply he was willing to fight to protect it. The shuttle launched under cover of darkness, its stealth systems masking its departure from the embassy. Thomas piloted the craft himself, flanked by 2 human fighters for escort. Arae sat in the co-pilot's seat, her focus divided between monitoring the systems and scanning for threats. They didn't have to wait long. The Andral ship decloaked moments after they left the planet's atmosphere. Sleek and predatory, it loomed like a shadow against the stars, its weapon systems coming online in an instant. Brace yourself, Thomas barked, maneuvering the shuttle into an evasive roll as the Andral opened fire. Arae gripped the console, her crystalline glow flickering in time with the pulse of enemy lasers. The escort fighters returned fire, but the Andral ship was heavily armored, its shields absorbing the attacks with ease. Thomas pushed the shuttle to its limits, weaving through the chaos as alarms blared around them. His focus was razor-sharp, every muscle in his body tuned to the rhythms of battle. But even as he fought to evade their pursuers, he couldn't ignore the growing unease in his gut. They're not trying to destroy us, he muttered. They're hurting us. Arae turned to him, her eyes wide. To where? Before Thomas could answer, the shuttle's sensors lit up with a proximity alert. A second Andral ship emerged from hyperspace directly ahead, cutting off their escape route. Thomas swore under his breath. Hang on, Arae. This is gonna get rough. The Andral trap was closing fast. 2 ships now boxed the shuttle in, their coordinated movements revealing a chilling precision. The first ship fired again, its lasers slicing through space and grazing the shuttle's shields. The second ship loomed ahead, its sleek form bristling with weapons. Thomas, their shields are impenetrable. Arae's voice rang with a rare note of panic as she scanned the enemy craft. We can't fight them head-on. I'm not planning to, Thomas growled, his hands gripping the controls. With a sharp pull, he threw the shuttle into a steep dive, its engines screaming in protest. What are you doing? Arae clutched the edges of her console as the cabin lurched. Getting creative, Thomas replied through gritted teeth. Hold tight, and don't stop scanning for weaknesses. Everyone's got an Achilles heel. The Andral ships pursued, their sleek forms cutting through the black void with terrifying speed. Plasma bursts lit the dark, illuminating the shuttle's desperate maneuvers as Thomas twisted and turned through the chaos. The escort fighters did their best to hold the enemy back, but one by one, they fell under the Andral's superior firepower. They're closing in, Arae called out, her crystalline glow flickering as another shot rattled the shuttle. We're running out of time. Thomas didn't answer. His mind was working overtime, analyzing their position, the enemy's tactics, and the rapidly dwindling options. Then he saw it, an asteroid field looming on the edge of their scanners. It was dense, chaotic, and just crazy enough to work. Buckle up, he ordered. We're heading into the rocks. The asteroid field was a labyrinth of tumbling boulders, each one large enough to obliterate the shuttle on impact. Thomas pushed the craft to its limits, weaving through the maze with a precision that left Arae speechless. The Andral ships followed, but their size worked against them. The smaller shuttle darted through narrow gaps and sudden turns, while the larger vessels struggled to keep pace. Thomas, the field is destabilizing, Arae warned, her voice cutting through the roar of the engines. The gravitational flux here is too strong. Those asteroids are breaking apart. Exactly, Thomas said, his lips curling into a grim smile. He guided the shuttle toward the densest part of the field, where massive rocks collided in slow, catastrophic explosions. The Andral ships hesitated, their pilots clearly debating whether to risk the unstable environment. They're hesitating, Arae said, her glow brightening with hope. Not for long, Thomas muttered. He activated the shuttle's rear-facing weapons and fired a series of well-placed shots. The blast struck nearby asteroids, sending them hurtling toward the pursuing ships. One of the Andral vessels took a direct hit, its shields flickering before it veered off course, colliding with a larger asteroid. The explosion lit up the field, sending shockwaves rippling through space. The second ship managed to avoid the debris, but the delay gave Thomas just enough time to slip through the chaos. He guided the shuttle toward the far edge of the field, where the shimmering outline of their destination, the secured station on the nearby moon, finally came into view. The shuttle landed in the hangar of the Lasari secured station, its engines sputtering as Thomas powered them down. Arae exhaled a shaky breath, her crystalline glow steadying as she stepped onto solid ground. "We made it," she said softly. "Barely," Thomas replied, his hand still hovering over his holstered pistol. His instincts told him the danger wasn't over yet. The station's Lasari commander, a stately figure named Tavares, greeted them with a bow. "Envoy Arae, we are honored to receive you. Your survival is a testament to your protector's skill." Arae nodded, her tone formal. "Thank you, Commander Tavares. But we cannot rest yet. The Androl's actions suggest a deeper conspiracy. I fear they will not stop until they achieve their goal." Tavares's glow dimmed slightly. "Then it is fortunate you are here. This station holds records of ancient Lasari knowledge, records the Androl desperately seek. If they intend to strike, they will come here." Thomas stiffened. "You're saying they planned this all along? That they wanted to drive us here?" Tavares hesitated, then nodded. "It is possible. The knowledge contained here is dangerous, even for the Lasari. If the Androl gain access to it, they could wield power that would destabilize the galaxy." Arae turned to Thomas, her expression grave. "We must defend this station at all costs." He nodded, his jaw tightening. "Then let's get to work." The station's defenses were formidable, but Thomas knew they'd be tested to their limits. He worked with Tavares and Arae to coordinate a defense plan, fortifying key choke points and deploying automated turrets around the perimeter. Meanwhile, Arae delved into the station's archives, searching for any information that might explain the Androl's obsession with Lasari genetic memory. The deeper she dug, the more troubling her findings became. "Thomas," she said one evening, her voice tinged with unease, "the knowledge encoded in our DNA, it is not merely ancient wisdom. It is a weapon." He frowned, pausing in his work. "A weapon? What kind of weapon?" Arae hesitated, her crystalline glow dimming. "Our ancestors created it to end a war that spanned the stars. It is a power capable of reshaping matter, bending the fabric of reality itself. They sealed it away, believing it too dangerous to wield." Thomas stared at her, the weight of her words sinking in. "And the Androl want to unlock it." "Yes," Arae said softly. "And if they succeed, they will unleash a force that could destroy us all." Before they could fully prepare, the Androl ships reappeared on the station sensors. This time, they didn't cloak their presence. They wanted their arrival to be known. Arae and Thomas stood side by side in the station's command center, watching as the enemy fleet approached. The Androl had brought reinforcements, 5 ships, each bristling with weapons. "They mean to take the station by force," Tavares said grimly. "Let them try," Thomas replied, his voice cold as steel. "We're ready for them." Arae placed a hand on his arm, her touch grounding him. "Thomas, no matter what happens, I want you to know that I am grateful for your trust. It has given me strength when I had none." He looked at her, his expression softening. "We're getting through this, Arae. Together." As the Androl ships closed in, the station's alarms blared, and the first shots were fired. The battle for the Lasari's most dangerous secret had begun. The Androl fleet descended on the Lasari station like a pack of predators, their weapons pounding against the station's shields. Inside, the defenders braced for a relentless assault. Thomas stood at the front lines, directing fire teams and manning the controls of an advanced turret system. "Arae," he called over the comms, "status on the archives?" Her voice came back, strained but steady. "The data is secure, but I need more time to lock it down completely. The Androl cannot get their hands on it." "They won't," Thomas promised, firing a volley at an incoming Androl boarding craft. The vessel exploded in a shower of flame and debris, but more took its place. As the station's shields began to falter, the Androl launched their boarding parties. Pods slammed into the station, their magnetic clamps holding them fast. From within, Androl soldiers emerged, sleek and predatory in their black armor. Thomas led the counterassault, his plasma rifle blazing as he cut through the enemy ranks. The station's corridors echoed with the sounds of battle, blaster fire, shouted commands, and the hiss of Andral energy weapons. In the archives, Arae worked frantically to finish encrypting the Lasari data. Tavares stood guard, his crystalline form casting a faint glow in the dim room. "Arae, we're out of time," he warned. "I just need a few more moments," she replied, her hands moving over the console with practiced precision. Then the door exploded inward. Andral soldiers poured into the room, their weapons trained on Arae and Tavares. Tavares stepped forward, shielding Arae with his body. "You will not take this knowledge." The Andral captain sneered. "Step aside, Lasari. This is not your fight to win." In the chaos of the battle, Thomas fought his way toward the archives. His HUD lit up with Arae's location, but the path was blocked by Andral troops. "Arae," he shouted over the comms. "Hold on. I'm coming." Her voice was faint. "Thomas, you can't." Static cut her off. Fueled by desperation, Thomas pushed forward, cutting through the enemy with ruthless efficiency. When he finally reached the archive chamber, he found the room in ruins. Tavares lay shattered on the floor, his crystalline form dark and lifeless. Arae stood in the center of the room, her glow brighter than ever. The Andral soldiers had stopped, their weapons lowering as they stared at her in awe. "What is this?" the Andral captain demanded. Arae's voice was calm, but filled with an unearthly power. "You sought the knowledge of my people. Now you will witness its cost." The room began to vibrate, the air shimmering with energy. Arae's crystalline body pulsed with light, and Thomas realized with horror what she was doing. "Arae, no!" he shouted, reaching for her. She turned to him, her eyes filled with a mixture of sorrow and resolve. "This is the only way, Thomas. They cannot have this power." Before he could stop her, Arae unleashed the full force of the Lasari's ancient weapon. Light erupted from her body, filling the chamber and spreading outward like a tidal wave. The Andral soldiers were vaporized in an instant, their screams cut short. The station shook violently as the energy surged through its systems. Thomas was thrown to the ground, his vision filled with blinding white light. When Thomas awoke, the station was eerily silent. The Andral fleet was gone, their ships reduced to debris orbiting the moon. The archives were intact, sealed behind layers of impenetrable encryption. But Arae was gone. Thomas staggered to his feet, his chest tightening as he searched the ruined chamber. All that remained of Arae was a faint shimmer of light, lingering in the air like the final note of a song. Tavares's backup systems activated, his voice a hollow echo. Arae used the weapon's full power. She sacrificed herself to protect us all. Thomas sank to his knees, the weight of her loss hitting him like a blow. She had trusted him, fought beside him, and in the end, given everything to ensure the safety of her people and the galaxy. Months later, the galaxy began to heal from the crisis. The Andral were sanctioned heavily by the Galactic Council, their ambitions checked for the foreseeable future. The Lasari, though still fragile, gained a newfound respect among the other species, their sacrifice serving as a testament to the power of trust and unity. Thomas returned to duty, but he was never the same. Arae's memory stayed with him, a constant reminder of what they had fought for and what they had lost. In quiet moments, he could almost hear her voice, a soft melody that resonated in his mind. And though the pain of her absence lingered, it was tempered by a quiet resolve. He had been her protector. She had been his closest ally. Together, they had saved the galaxy, and he would ensure her legacy endured.